how do we do that? So at every single stage, we want to create a protocol that eliminates the need for a third party. So for the Polkadot protocol, we have validators, we have nodes, so we are opening up the network in a decentralized way, and every single actor sort of contributes to the network protocol. We don't want like dedicated third-party solutions that sort of act like a middleman in a Web3 landscape where we want to eliminate middlemen to begin with, right? So right now, as it stands in the blockchain space, to get like that level of access, a user has to run a node on their own. So taking the analogy from the previous speaker, so we're asking the user to go to the well and get the water out of that well by themselves. So, but unfortunately, the demands from the user are always like, this is the first thing that they say whenever they are trying to use an application, just make it easy for me to use it, right? So, and that's a fair demand, given like the entire Web 2 like economy is built around this, like convenience. Okay, so what is the user willing to give away for making the service convenient for the user, right? So, so the user expectations, the main thing is make it easy, and yeah, so like I mentioned, there are two options. So one is to run your own node. This requires some level of technical knowledge and some level of like emotional as well as like physical investment into setting up that infrastructure. It's slightly inconvenient as it stands, and there are few blockchains out there where it's not even possible for you to run your own node on like a machine that you have right now. So that's a problem that needs to be addressed. And then the other thing is the usage of publicly accessible nodes. Now, being a blockchain ecosystem, there are plenty of nodes that are out there that give you some kind of service for you to be able to like access the actual blockchain. So that can be a little centralized and insecure. So we'll see shortly why. But it's convenient, right? So you just connect to that service. You're able to send your tokens or stake your tokens or whatever. Right, so take a look at this, and we have these central access points in our, in our ecosystem as well, along with like other blockchain ecosystems. So we want to bridge both of them. The challenge here is purely technical. It's not something that can't be done. So I'll show you shortly like what kind of solution Polkadot and Substrate have come up with. So I have a couple of examples here. I'm not just talking in the air, like there's no hypothetical things here. So there are issues. I've listed two of them. I'm not calling out on those two. Those are the two things that I found when I searched for issues with having these third-party services. So the first thing is possibility of censorship or hijacking. It's pretty straightforward. An RPC call is not the same as interacting with the blockchain directly, right? So an RPC call is made to kind of like a server, a node that acts as a server. It can censor, some transactions. It can the infrastructure itself can be sort of hijacked, like what I have up there. The second thing is reliability. So the talk's title is like being building an unstoppable app. So an unstoppable app requires like a reliable host or something that's always available for the users to access. So that sort of reliability is gone if you're having these central point of failures. And the last thing, it's not much of being unstoppable, but being taken advantage of. Like there's a possibility of like front running. There are people actually eavesdropping on the transactions that you're submitting. And things might be taken advantage of. So these are the issues with like RPC nodes that we use every day through our wallets installed on our browsers. And all of you developers out there, you all need like a standing applause, because As Web3 developers, the user expectations are a little more than a normal user. It's like you have to make it easy for them, and more than that, you have to make it secure. And if you listen to the previous talk, you want to add some privacy layer to it as well. So there's a lot going on here, and then we're trying to solve like really, really hard problems. Yeah, so then it comes to this point where why can't we like have a node, a light client that runs on the browser, and on a resource-constrained environment like a browser or mobile, directly accesses the blockchain data, with cryptographic guarantees. Can we sort of create such kind of solution? And to be able to create such solution, we have Substrate. Substrate is the blockchain building framework, which is designed from ground up to sort of support such level of decentralization. So the key actors here are nodes, validators, and light clients. So we're going to focus on that implementation on Substrate for this talk. So for those of you who are not familiar with Substrate, so Substrate is a modular, flexible, and extensible framework for building blockchains. You can just go to the GitHub repo, download the Substrate template node, and have the blockchain up and running. So that's how easy it is to get started with like building blockchains. Substrate has palettes. All of these are like Lego blocks that you can include in your blockchain runtime and sort of build interesting blockchain applications. So yeah, so we have Substrate Connect. So that's the solution developers at Parity have come up with. So Substrate Connect is a real Substrate client that runs in JavaScript. So to our knowledge, this is the first node that entirely runs in a JavaScript execution environment. So it's a big achievement in a way. So here we have a node that's directly connecting to the blockchain from the browser. And you can test it out. So that's the command you can just have on your command prompt, and you have it set up. So Substrate Connect itself, so it's a package, I'll talk about it later. It's like an extension that connects to the blockchains. The underlying client that actually connects to the blockchains is small dot. So small dot. So it's like a small dot node. So it itself is powered by the technology of WebAssembly. For Substrate and Polkadot, WebAssembly is the key. So the entire runtime and the state transition logic, we want browsers to be able to like execute that. So that node is powered by WebAssembly. And then small dot itself is coded in Rust. So you can explore that as well. So it's ready for download. So you're free to like check it out. Download Substrate Connect from the the extension app stores, available on Google Chrome and Firefox. So the way it works is you can use like Polkadot, UIs like Polkadot.js apps, and if there is no Substrate Connect installed, it'll try to initialize the light client in the browser itself. It can face some issues because this requires some TLS certificates, or it's not easy to connect to without like the TLS certificate through browser, but actually having an extension sort of bypasses that problem with the legacy Web 2 architecture. So install the extension, connect to the Substrate Connect, and then access the blockchain that you want to, that it supports. So here is, I didn't want to do like a live demo given the time constraint, so here is a recording of okay, so this was supposed to play. This was like a GIF, but it's not playing. So anyway, so you can connect Polkadot.js to the Substrate Connect, and as you can see, it's capable of supporting like multiple chains. Okay, so the single light client connecting, opening ports to like different peers on different networks. So that's the possibility that we're seeing here. Given Polkadot and parachains, you want one client that is running, that is connecting to several chains at once, and then giving you access to the blockchain services. So if you want to see Substrate connect in action, so you can actually check the logs as well as how many peers you're connected to, the block number, and so on and so forth. So I don't know how I'm doing with time, but yeah, so we're almost nearing the end of the talk. So there's no trick here. So the node, it's an actual node that is running in JavaScript, and we are one of the first to develop such node that's connecting to a major blockchain. So the API is very similar to interacting with like RPC node. So this light client itself opens an interface to make like RPC calls. So if you're a developer who already developed an app around that, you can directly switch to Substrate Connect. And yeah, so it can be experimented right now. And yeah, so it caught a lot of attention during Polkadot Decoded. That happened not so long ago. People are very excited, and that's why I was asked to rehash the content and sort of present it to this audience today. So yeah, so try to take a look at this talk, Talisman. It's like a wallet. So they've delivered like a demo using Substrate Connect, how they sort of like, do give like better performance in terms of like user experience. You're able to quickly connect to the chain. Yeah, so far I've painted a very, very green picture of what light clients are and then how they sort of enable these unstoppable apps. But what are the challenges with like light clients? In a way, if you think about them, so they are just takers, not givers. So they're not giving anything back to the network. They're actually occupying like a slot on like a node that is giving the service. So so they're good for the decentralization perspective, but Web3 is all about like incentives, right? So somehow we have to incentivize nodes to serve these kind of light clients. The problem is not much right now because not many people are aware because the problem of defaults. So the default settings is a big thing. People actually pay billions of dollars to have a certain kind of default setting out there, right? So even Polkadot.js, by default, it connects to a bunch of RPC nodes that are out there with the light client experimental thing down there. So the users have to be really aware or be educated about like what's going on to be able to access this kind of service, to be able to not trust these people, even though they are big names, like, so anything can happen anytime. So just go to the light client and have an access to the protocol itself, which you trust more than the entities that are listed there. So a couple of ideas, and for the challenges is this. Reserving slots for light clients. So again, light clients don't do a lot of stuff. They don't actually like execute the blocks by themselves. They have like lesser requirements than like a full node. So it makes sense to sort of burn that into the protocol itself to support like more light clients. The other thing is like incentivizing people to run these sort of nodes. Like, have like micro payments. Every time someone transacts with a light client, already the transaction fees in Substrate and Polkadot is very less. Have like micro payments on top of that, like a 1% of the transaction fee going to like these sort of nodes that are sort of serving the light clients for the decentralization promise that Web3 want to deliver. Again, I just checked this repo yesterday night. There are 109 open issues and then 17 pull requests and about like 230 closed issues, right? So it's still in development. It's a team at Parity that is working on this, but being like a Web3 venture, I would like request all of you to take a look at it, use it in your applications, try to find out like what kind of bugs are there, and then sort of solve them. Because once we solve everything, make it like a mature client, then everybody can sort of use it. And with that, I finished my talk. Yeah, so I hope you found this interesting. So the light clients are starting to mature. They're going to serve the promise of having like unstoppable apps end to end. So the blockchain is going to host an app, and nobody has a kill switch to that. And as a user, you have unstoppable access to that app running on that blockchain as well. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Thanks to Rada for this amazing speech you have about like clients. I really like this topic. Actually, that's really a point for the future of Web3. I will ask you just for 2 minutes, and our next speaker is coming in the next 2 minutes. Thank you.
Please welcome our next speaker, Ox Brainjar from Composable.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Brainjar from Composable Finance. And today I'll be presenting to you our vision for XCVM, along with a general overview as to how all these different pieces fit together. So first of all, I think it is becoming clear that obviously Composable is doing quite a bit of things in this ecosystem. Our intention is to really have Composable and Picasso, both of our parachains, emerge as the first cross-chain smart contracting ecosystem. On top of that, we've also been building a plethora of palettes to be embedded directly in the runtime of both Picasso and composable parachains. And just a very brief overview of some of these things. We're obviously working on Centauri, the first trustless bridge to the Cosmos ecosystem utilizing IBC. We're building Pablo, a DEX, along with additional DeFi primitives as palettes directly in the Picasso runtime. And we're also working on a substrate-based oracle with the intention that all of these different pieces can stack together to create one cohesive financial ecosystem to exist within the Kusama and Polkadot ecosystems as substrate native applications. Now, XCVM is kind of this tooling that then pieces everything together and also introduces a contracting framework for logic to do so. And for us, the main focus was really how can we build tooling to enable ease of use for the end user. And when we set out thinking about how can this be done in the substrate perspective, we realized that there needed to be robust frameworks to actually call into these palettes and to be able to orchestrate logic across not just our Kusama or not just our Polkadot parachains, but between both parachains and also across multiple parachains. And then, of course, because we're also focused on extending IBC to other ecosystems, also extending this communication to other ecosystems as well. So trying to figure out a way in which our technology could be extended to the outside ecosystem beyond just Polkadot led us to build XCVM. And what XCVM really intends to do is create a framework that allows for message passing and logic orchestration across multiple different blockchains with a single contract being deployed to allow for not only ease of use for the developer, but also ease of use for the end user, because obviously interesting user experiences can be built around a single contract interface. So in thinking about how to actually architect XCVM and what the problem was that we're trying to solve, I think the problem that we're trying to solve is essentially maximalism. So how can a user who doesn't know anything about DEXs tomorrow just decide to pick up MetaMask and start trading on a DEX? You're not really sure, of course, which protocol to actually interact with. You're not sure if you're getting the best rate. And I think there's a massive kind of like information gap for individual users who are new to the ecosystem. And so we wanted to orchestrate XCVM to fit user centricity first. So essentially, how can we get users to interact with an application that all they need to understand is what is happening, not necessarily how it is happening. And so looking at the technical stacks out there, we realized that, of course, this means we have to build a framework for cross-chain applications, and investigating some of the solutions out there like Layer 0, we quickly realized that these frameworks, these toolings around cross-chain, essentially glue, still resulted in the developer needing to deploy a contract on one chain, connect it to another chain, and store the logic on each individual chain. So it results in a super complex perspective to actually build one of these retail-facing applications. And so we decided to architect XCVM in such a framework where developers only have to deploy a single contract, messages are passed trustlessly using a variety of transport layers to multiple different chains. So no longer does developer need to deploy multiple different contracts, and no longer does developer need to store logic on every single chain. And so just kind of reiterating this a little bit more, I think there's this notion of like deploying an application natively cross-chain. When you're building something like, say, cross-chain AMM or a cross-chain lending solution like Aave, for instance, or taking Fuse cross-chain, oftentimes what will happen is a single instance of the application will be deployed on multiple different chains, but then there's no real like logic layer to connect all these different instances to do sort of higher level things like health factors or liquidation bots or monitoring of specific pools and rebalancing and all these different types of things that are sort of like traditional within the TradFi perspective. So these things are basically not possible to be able to be built with a framework just deploying multiple different contracts, aka the multi-chain perspective, and then just gluing it all together, aka cross-chain. And so we saw this as a major gap in the market and decided to architect XCVM with the notion in mind that logic needs to be maintained at a higher level, and it doesn't matter how the contracts then basically become connected, whether that's through IBC or whether that's through XCM. So what powers all of this infrastructure we're talking about is substrate palettes. And essentially, this is what our infrastructure actually looks like. So XCVM is a contract layer that sits on top of all of these different pieces of infrastructures that are all individual substrate palettes on our parachains, and allows for essentially being able to call directly into these palettes, but also be able to do something interesting, which is be able to also call into other parachains as well. And so for the first time ever, we've now introduced a COSM-WASM VM onto our chain. So introducing WASM-based smart contracting onto parachains. For the first time, this will be in production on Kusama, on our Picasso parachain. And essentially, this is the framework that we use to do all this orchestration and cross-palette calling, cross-chain calling across not only the different palettes on our chain, but also palettes and interfaces on other chains as well. So just diving a little bit deeper into how XCVM is actually architected, we've essentially taken inspiration from XCM, and that is essentially the sort of prioritization of XCM over time is to be able to pass data from chain to chain, and that we're going to live in a world where basically blockchains are talking to each other through data passing. And so we've created a messaging framework called the XCVM instruction set that can be passed from chain to chain, all from one location where the contract is initially deployed. Again, we also utilize the COSM-WASM smart contracting framework, so there's obviously tons of developers within the Cosmos ecosystem who know Rust. They are now writing COSM-WASM contracts for a variety of applications on Juno, on Osmosis, et cetera. And so now those developers can also deploy onto the Picasso parachain very shortly. But I think also what's even more interesting is if, say, Polkadot users want to make trades on Juno or Osmosis or any of these other ecosystems, they can now do so through XCVM by essentially interacting with a contract on our parachain that points directly to, say, Osmosis or Juno or any of these other COSM-WASM-based chains, and IBC messages will be passed back and forth to do so. So just really, really breaking this down as to how this actually works from a developer perspective. So say someone wants to essentially create a contract that routes orders to the deepest DEX in the ecosystem of the chains that Composable is connected to. So the developer writes a contract and specifies a function as general as swap. Thereafter, the routing layer specifies essentially which address should the message be passed to, so which actual DEX should this interact with on the specific chain. Thereafter, messages are passed, aka the XCVM instruction set, to satellite contracts, which then interact with these respective protocols, and execution happens. So I think this is a very abstract idea of like, what does it mean to actually have logic for cross-chain orchestration and for being able to have blockchains actually talk to each other. I think now, like, we've really been struggling from the parachain perspective to create applications that actually utilize XCM in like really innovative and novel manners. And so I think with one of the major things that XCVM will do for the parachain ecosystem is now any parachain that wants to do some sort of higher order logic, like say, farm on Mangata and take those LP tokens and take out a loan on some other lending protocol on another chain, and then take that loan and redeploy it into an LBP on another chain. All this logic can now be composed in one smart contract deployed on our parachain and orchestrated across all of these different chains within the parachain ecosystem. And I think what's also interesting is we're the first team to actually bridge Cosmos and Polkadot together. So via IBC, both ecosystems will be able to talk to each other. And so now this means developers can actually build applications with parachains and IBC-enabled Cosmos SDK chains in the backend. So for the first time, both ecosystems, both classes of applications, and essentially, IBC and XCM will now be able to actually talk to each other and work together for one sort of new next generation set of applications. So I think it's important to note, obviously, what are the pieces of Cosmos technology that we are using to build this stuff. So I spoke a little bit about substrate palettes and how crucial they are to our infrastructure. But of course, we're also spending quite a lot of time bringing IBC to Polkadot. So Centauri is our initiative to connect Cosmos and the Polkadot ecosystems via IBC. And we're also bringing IBC to Near by way of Polkadot as well. And we're intending to also expand these efforts to ZK Sync and multiple other rollups and side chains. And this is really important to us because even though XCVM doesn't necessarily care about which transport protocol it works with, it's essentially bridge agnostic. One key component here to realize is that obviously some bridging is more trustless than others. And for us, obviously, IBC and light client-based bridging is, the pinnacle of trustless bridging at the moment for us. And we believe that it is fully worth it to invest time into essentially burning down the trusted bridges that exist in the ecosystem at the moment and replacing them with trustless bridges, because I just don't really imagine a world in even 5 years where anyone's going to want to use validator-based bridges or multi-sigs or any of these types of infrastructure, because it just is also difficult for teams to maintain as well. Secondarily, we're also focused on bringing CosmWasm to our parachain. So as I said, we essentially have a palette bringing essentially CosmWasm. We've built a CosmWasm VM as a palette onto our chain. So now essentially developers will be able to, and this was demoed at Unchained, our event on July 1st. You can find the demo on our Twitter, of course. But essentially, CosmWasm is a framework that is very kind of agnostic to the underlying consensus protocol. And its tooling is, very kind of malleable and easy to understand for a lot of Rust developers. And so we decided that this would be the framework to actually bring WASM to our parachain. So oftentimes people ask me, are we deploying a new language? And the answer is obviously no. Are we deploying a new contract framework? The answer is also no. So instead of basically rewriting existing smart contracts and protocols, we're essentially creating a framework around that's essentially an add-on via the CosmWasm framework to handle state transitions, reverts, disputes. And what ends up happening is that the XCVM instruction set is essentially a set of reversible state transitions. So essentially, you'll see in the next slide, you'll be able to define state transition functions across multiple blockchains through a single instruction set. And how this actually works is basically through exposing lower level APIs to directly query and interact with the current state of the chain with respect to that specific transition function. And then, of course, a higher level interface that observes the full instruction set to make sure execution is being completed along this full instruction set of execution. So putting this all together, this is inspired from the OSI model for networking, of course, that we all have experienced. And so for us, the XCVM application layer is where users would write cross-chain applications. Thereafter, you have this presentation layer, which is then basically the, once the instruction set is generated, actually passing that on to the routing layer, which decides which protocols to actually interface with. Thereafter, again, we are transport layer agnostic, so IBC, XCM, and multiple different transport protocols are used to pass these messages. And of course, the bottom layer is our infrastructure, which is our 2 parachains. So talking a little bit about what the use cases are of something like this, obviously there's tons of other cross-chain projects out there like Layer 0 and Connext, who are basically, throwing around this idea of a cross-chain DEX, cross-chain lending aggregator. So if you guys want to read about those use cases, you can check those out. But I think one of the things that are, I'd like to highlight basically 2 sort of key use cases that you wouldn't be able to do without XCVM, and how XCVM basically makes these things possible. So the first thing is cross-chain MEV. So we've been talking a lot about what MEV is going to look like in the ETH2 perspective, talking a lot about like what does MEV look like within the Polkadot ecosystem. So I actually believe fundamentally that relayers that are passing messages from chain to chain, as we expect the world of blockchains to evolve, if IBC does become the transport layer that other ecosystems are talking to each other with, then this becomes like a massive opportunity for relayers to actually now make money through good MEV, not necessarily bad MEV. And what this means is instructions can be interpreted by relayers and thereafter acted upon. And I think there will also be some collusion between relayers and validators as well, where basically relayers and validators, if they work together, they'll understand what transactions are upcoming in the next block. And then, of course, that does also introduce MEV. And so XCVM empowers these different players to now actually, instead of running net negative businesses, to be able to run net positive businesses, and now actually have this relayer incentivization problem solved. The second piece I'd like to also talk about is function aggregation. So I think there is a world in which everyone believes that DeFi will replace traditional finance, and I think we're obviously many, many years away from that. But one of the things that I'm excited about and why we're building XCVM is because I think the reason why people still exist in the traditional finance ecosystem is because A, it's easier, but also B, you can do a lot of very complex things because you have authorities like DTCC and others who are performing settlement and things like that. And so I think with XCVM, you'll now be able to create these complex structured products and these complex derivative instruments. For instance, you could take out a position on DYDX within the Cosmos ecosystem and then hedge that same position on UniV3 on, say, Ethereum mainnet, and then basically actually take out a loan on both of these positions on some derivatives protocol within the Polkadot ecosystem. So I think there's like these contracts, even though they seem simple, they're actually introducing brand new financial primitives. And I think these primitives are very much so simply not possible with things like Layer 0 and others that are just really serving as glue code. Is this notion of basically what can logic do for the blockchain ecosystem within the context of orchestrating functionality. And so I'll take you through a perspective of how this actually works within the loan perspective. So someone would write a XCVM contract and essentially allow for LP tokens on one chain to be deposited. A message is passed to another contract that says, hey, this collateral has been deposited. Now the loan can now be taken out. And XCVMs can specify all the possible instructions all from the top layer so that you don't need to have multiple instances of the same protocol on multiple chains. And this is sort of like, I think, the most salient way of describing this, which really shows, at the top level, you have the contract actually getting deployed. You then have relayers broadcasting the instruction sets to different chains, and you see the various functions. 1, 2, 3 happens in one ecosystem, then a relayer passes the message from the last instruction and says, okay, Polkadot ecosystem, execute 4, 5, 6, 7, and then another relayer picks up the next step and says, okay, 8, 9, 10, 11 should happen in the Cosmos ecosystem. So now we're really just, it's almost like, I don't want to go as far as to say like composing VMs, because we're not doing that, but we are composing execution in an asynchronous manner across multiple different ecosystems. Now, all this sounds cool from a technical perspective, but what does this actually look like from a user perspective? And I think a lot of the things that we do at Composable sometimes don't make sense to people because of how radical we're thinking about, like really trying to serve the user first and then sort of build technical solutions around that. And that's very much so how XCVM was architected. Like we started with this and basically worked onwards to figuring out what the best possible architecture would look like. So we demoed this in Berlin at Unchained, and basically what this is showing you is a user connects their wallets, multiple wallets, through our proxy wallet, and then specifies, okay, here are the two things I have. I have Pika and I have USDC. What do I want to end up with? I want USDC on Arbitrum. I want ETH on mainnet. And then instead of specifying which AMM you want to use and what's your slippage tolerance, which you of course could do through the advanced settings, but if that's all someone wants to do, that's all they have to do. They click execute. And then from there, to make the user actually understand that there's stuff happening in the background, we then have to have what's called the sexy stepper, which basically is we're trying to think about what is the way in which people can actually understand what's happening across multiple blockchains without displaying them 5 different explorers at the same time. And so we essentially have created this like framework where essentially indentations mean you've now showed up on another blockchain, and it expands out to the explorer itself. You could also share the routes. So for instance, if you want to show people how you aped into some farm, you could also share that route of this stepper. So this stepper will evolve significantly over time, but I think it's really key to illustrate that like we're trying to get the use of money and the movement of money to feel almost as simple as just writing an email, basically. And that's why we have the word compose. You don't see the word swap here, and it's compose from and then into because of exactly that. And one could, of course, conjecture, okay, well, why don't you just do this for all functionalities? And so that's what we are. I don't have that slide here, but we are intending for this exact framework to be reusable for lending and for many other functionalities in the future. So all that being said, around the UI perspective, like we are an infrastructure project, and so we've put a lot of time and thinking into what are the pieces that someone needs to build one of these beautiful retail-facing applications. And so we're open sourcing our proxy wallet, we're open sourcing the stepper, we're open sourcing also an integrations wrapper to prevent people from having to integrate like 3 different times with 3 different ecosystems. And so obviously I talked a lot about technology all the way up to now, but I think it is incredibly critical for us over these next few years in crypto to really hone in on the 2 key pieces that we need to solve. One, preserving decentralization, right? Oftentimes we've seen all these different C-DeFi protocols and applications pop up because they provide a good user experience, but of course, decentralization takes a detrimental hit as a result. And then 2, of course, is user experience. I think instead of focusing heavily on, what's the most amazing technology we can create, we really need to focus on how are we going to actually make users feel delighted by these types of applications we're introducing. And with that, that's how we bring about mass adoption. So thank you.
Okay. Thanks for your presentation. Are you okay to take one or two questions or not?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, if we have, I don't know. Okay, we have one. Just a moment.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. In terms of transport layer, the equivalent of IBC in the Cosmos ecosystem is XCMP, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I was wondering, what was the rationale to choose IBC as a transport layer instead of XCMP?
Yeah, so the idea is actually that we're able to integrate with multiple different transport layers. So we're intending for basically IBC and XCM to be, actually, I'm trying to find that slide. Anyway, it's on one of these slides, basically. But essentially, we're creating what's called an open transport protocol. So Nomad, Connext, Layer 0, Wormhole, IBC, XCM. These are all the types of transport protocols that can be plugged into OTP for XCVM usage. But to answer your question, like why are we also focusing on bringing IBC to multiple different ecosystems as opposed to XCM? First of all, I think it's, bringing IBC to multiple ecosystems is basically, IBC was built for that. IBC was created with the perspective that this transfer protocol would leave the Cosmos ecosystem, as opposed to the initial architecture for XCM, which I think at some point XCM will also be at this stage, which is something we could revisit.
Thank you for your talk. Besides cross-chain interactions, do you see any other strategies to scale DeFi services that maybe technically would be maybe less challenging and maybe other scaling techniques, basically?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like some really obvious basic ones, like monitoring, right? Like just being a trader and just knowing like what's happening to your position would be nice. And then I think also like the second thing is just like having applications, like you don't necessarily need to build a cross-chain application to provide your user with a nice UX, right? So you could build something interesting on ETH mainnet that just like makes Uniswap v3 look as stupid as physically possible, and you just execute it through that way. I just think that it does the user a disservice by not building a cross-chain application simply because you're leaving out the opportunities and the potential like additional depth and additional potential like entry points to other ecosystems that they could have by just offering them a single application with a single backend and a single set of smart contracts. And that's, I think, one of the major things that we're seeing now is like cross-chain applications beget user adoption because of enhanced user experience, but it's a user experience that's also cohesive in nature. Did you have another question? Oh, okay.
Thank you very much. If people have other questions, I think they could join you on the Pillar Room. You will stay for the day, I suppose. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
and,
thank you.
Yeah, enjoy your day.
For our next speaker, please welcome Lucas Vo from Centrifuge.
Hello, everybody. I hope you're enjoying those comfortable seats and have a bit of time with me today to talk about real-world DeFi and real use cases, which I think are, after the last couple of months, probably something we should all be thinking about, because we've seen that a lot of this hype, the unsustainable yield farming, is obviously all gone, and maybe like a lot of us today are thinking, okay, like now what's going to happen? Well, like let's think back at why we started building DeFi, and like how actually the technology fundamentally is going to improve things, and how we can still have a bit fun in all this. Just super quickly introduction about myself. I spent all my life, it feels like, working in tech. I straight out of high school kind of knew, okay, like Web 2, like startups, internet is gonna be the most exciting technology that I could think of at the time. And as I started going into that very early on, spent about 10 years working in Web 2, and for the last 5 years actually went into Web 3. So in 2017, like I really understood, okay, like if you think of blockchains, what that could lead to, because sort of like thinking of how Ethereum can allow you actually not just to move money around, which is kind of something you do without thinking much about, but actually how it can allow you to program money, that's when it gets really exciting. And that kind of was my story of getting into crypto. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Centrifuge. A bit of a backstory, Centrifuge is almost as old as my history in crypto. We started very early on, before DeFi even existed, before like stablecoins really were a thing. It was 2017, and the ICOs were kind of like the hot thing that actually made a lot of DeFi kind of like necessary, and proved out to be the first use cases for DeFi. So we always wanted to figure out, like, and this comes from like my history in fintech, we wanted to figure out how do we allow real businesses to use open technologies to have kind of like a bit of a chance against like these giant tech companies that kind of like just mostly use their own position of power to get the most revenue, get the biggest platform, like increase their moat, right? And so we said, okay, well, actually, if you have an open Ethereum or like an open blockchain and everyone can work together, that actually allows you to do stuff that you maybe otherwise couldn't. And that was very early. But so then, like, kind of like I started doing more and more about finance. Like, I knew nothing about finance before I got into DeFi. Like, I thought it was the most boring thing. People in suits would do it that really didn't want to work and kind of like were mostly unnecessary. I think for a lot of finance, this is actually, I would say, still very much true. But obviously, we all like really depend on finance. Like, finance is what allows us to do stuff in this world. If you have an idea, you want to go out and build something, you're not going to be able to just take this idea. You need actually money to hire a team. You need money to buy the goods that you want to sell. You need money to educate yourself, to get surgery, to buy a house, right? It's all like money is maybe the necessary evil, maybe just like the fuel that we can use to actually like impact the world. And so if you think of like this power, well, you can think of how do you actually make sure that everyone has access to it. And that's why I think access to finance is actually such an important like part of how we live together. Like, if you don't have access to finance, you don't have access to building your own company, buying a house, building a house, like having a good education, right? All this stuff. So you're at a huge disadvantage. And I think like our financial system today is very bad at actually giving everyone access to finance. So like, if you think of finance today, unfortunately what happens is you have like a borrower that wants to borrow money. They pay, I don't know, 10% interest a year. And then there's probably like about 10 different companies and people that are kind of like taking some of that interest. And then like, if I put money on my bank account, like I hardly see any of that, those 10% of where my money was lent out to end up actually on my savings account, right? Over the last couple of 100 years, we built a financial system that became bigger and bigger. It's actually now estimated to be around 20% of our GDP. So imagine like I spend $1, about 20% goes to banks, credit funds, whatnot, right? And hasn't really been like seen this efficiency gains that everything else in tech has seen, and with the advance of the internet. And so I think in a way, DeFi is the like email of what the letter is that the financial system is today, right? And so kind of like going to what we want to build with DeFi, right? Like we're building an infrastructure that doesn't rely on all these middlemen, or at least kind of like these intermediaries that are mostly here today to justify their own fees. And we're doing that in a way that anyone can actually build it. And if there's arbitrage, you can kind of come and use that, exploit it. You can try to build a better alternative that's cheaper. And you can compose on each other and kind of like do this together, right? And so so how does this actually affect the real world, right? Like if we see people doing crazy stuff in DeFi today with their crypto utility tokens, governance tokens, DOT, any like KSM, like ETH, right? Like all of the parachain tokens are all like part of this DeFi ecosystem. And it's where we started because, well, there was no financial system for these assets. But in today's financial system, there are actually a lot of assets, a lot of users that are like equally lacking in a fair or good user experience. So I just want to like highlight two of the things and then talk about what we're doing at Centrifuge and how we're kind of like trying to solve a real problem, and how I believe that's like one of the major sort of places where we can grow into. And I mean Polkadot, the ecosystem, crypto in general, like where we can show that DeFi actually is a place for like building good financial products. I made this. I showed how like a small business would maybe pay 10, 15, 20% interest a year. They want to borrow $100,000 to buy a new piece of equipment to manufacture more efficiently. They're going to a bank. They're trying to get a loan. At a bank, their priority number 1 million, because like there's probably 100,000 other people that want an equally small loan. It doesn't make a difference to their bottom line. Google on the other side, and like this is maybe a bit outdated now with inflation, but like last year they were borrowing at basically zero, right? So today this is only getting worse, right? Like interest rates for everyone are going up, for Google as well, but for small businesses even more. But Google does like borrow money at a cost of capital that's like less than a tenth. So what does that mean actually? Like if you think of it, Google is able to undercut their competition, the small businesses, everyone that doesn't have access to this cheap liquidity, because if they're spending $1 billion developing a phone and they're only paying like a couple of million in interest a year, and someone else is paying 10% interest in a year, so $100 million a year in interest, right? Like that cost has to be passed on to someone, and that's like how like these large companies with a finance department of a couple of dozen people or hundreds of people have actually this huge advantage. And that's why I kind of like talk about the fuel, and as we think of DeFi, right, like we can build products that actually like try to get rid of this inherent advantage that large companies have. Another like completely astounding number that I always think of is like Western Union, the company, all they do is they send money from A to B. They have like revenue of $5 billion a year. For what exactly? Something that really is not much more than an email in technical terms, right? Like sending tokens around, ridiculously easy. Yet, like $5 billion is waiting to get disrupted. And those $5 million, like, it's not the Googles, it's not us here in overbanked Europe that are paying that. It's actually like someone trying to send money from the UK to Costa Rica, or from paying a farmer for coffee in Ecuador, right? Like that's kind of like where this money is coming from, and that's you kind of like then think of it, oh, like why are we paying that much, when really it should be free or nearly free. So DeFi can be this new financial system because it's built based on technology that is kind of pushing for transparency, pushing for removal of intermediaries that are not necessary, for kind of like allowing competition to come up and provide better alternatives, and like for your DEX aggregator, just use the cheapest exchange possible, right? For your like for many different layer 2s to like innovate and compete on like the cheapest payments network, so that you can actually just pay money wherever it is cheapest, however it's easiest. And I think at the very core, right, these ideas of what crypto was in 2017, the idea of Ethereum, of like people building applications and working together, right? Like this idea of DeFi money Legos coming together and working together on this is actually kind of like what makes us competitive with finance today. So this is openness, the transparency, and the trustlessness, right? Because this means you can work together without relying on the large bank that is the trusted intermediary that can allow many different borrowers to match up with many different lenders. So what do we do in all this? Centrifuge is bringing real-world assets on chain because, as I've talked about all these different examples, well, like we have our crypto tokens that we want to use DeFi with, but the majority of the world does not have those tokens, and they actually also need access to finance. So what they need is actually they need a way for their own assets to come into DeFi and for them to be able to build or to borrow with the assets that they have, meaning their real estate, their future revenue as a small business, their like goods that are being shipped around the world, consumer loans, right? And so if we want to make DeFi useful for these users, well, let's start with like actually getting their assets on chain, and that's what we're doing at Centrifuge. Like most simply explained, we're kind of like taking these off-chain assets that are usually very hard to price, they're hard to understand. We put them into pools, so you can, for example, have a pool of real estate loans, or you can have a pool of trade finance loans against many different shippers around the world, and then like allow those tokens to be made composable in DeFi, to be used as collateral in stable coins, to be used for leverage in an Aave market, for example, and earn yield on them, or for DeFi lenders to invest in them and kind of like diversify the risk, right? We're building all this in Polkadot. I mentioned our history was quite old. So we started in 2017, kind of looking at this stuff and thinking, and then DeFi started to become a thing. And we said, okay, like actually if we want to build an ecosystem of service providers, people that work together on bringing these assets on chain, like how do we do it best? And we kind of like made this bet on Polkadot very early on to say, okay, well, like it gives us the power of our own chain. It gives us the ability to have built-in very strong governance, which is, in my opinion, one of the most important features or kind of like components of a good, agile, fast-moving, but also scalable and secure DeFi protocol. And we can do this in a scalable way, because if you look at these real-world assets, there's usually a lot of data with it. There's like a lot of very specialized calculations we do, and so we can do that much more efficiently if you actually build our own runtime, right? And so we actually launched our own proof-of-stake chain that was right after Kusama launch, about a year before Polkadot went live, and then or half a year before Polkadot went live, sorry. And then like kind of around that time, like we moved over to, around a year later, we moved over to run Parachain. So in April this year, we went live as a Parachain. So migrated kind of like our entire chain and have now been working on expanding that. So what is it? So maybe if you think of these use cases, these assets, right? Today, most of DeFi TVL is crypto native, and I don't need to mention more than the word Terra for like a lot of us, right, to think back at where all this TVL was coming from, how it was incentivized, like what people were doing with it. The reality is a lot of it was actually just incentivized by like VCs, retail, whatever, buying kind of like these yield incentives, hoping that the price goes up. Now, of course, that's not really sustainable. So. Well, I can tell you there's like trillions in assets out there in the real world that are paying sustainable yields so you can safely farm or just invest in. And they actually are interested in having an alternative to banks, right? And so kind of like this is the opportunity for us to like as like a lot of this hot air or maybe the optimism of countless DeFi lenders has gone away a bit. We can actually say, okay, like let's build this technology for what we wanted to build it in the first place, to actually solve these people's problem and bring trillions of dollars into this industry. So where we are today, we have about 10 pools live. So there's real estate, trade finance, emerging market consumer loans. we have a pool of gig economy workers like Uber drivers, delivery drivers, that today have a very hard time to get access to capital because they're self-employed a lot of times, right? And no bank is going to look at your Uber app and say, oh yeah, like you have a good history of driving and you're going to be around and make more money next month and we're going to give you a credit, right? So any kind of like these assets, you have about 10 of those pools. You have 85 million in TVL, actually a little bit more now, close to 90. What does it mean? 90 million TVL, it means we've taken 90 million USD stablecoins, mostly DAI, and businesses that are using our products are taking those into fiat and giving it to thousands of borrowers. And most of these borrowers actually don't even know that they're being financed by a maker, or that there is an Aave money market that people are providing liquidity into, that their money is coming from, right? They're just buying a house. And that's how it should be. So we have about, we have two big DeFi protocols that we work with today. Coming from our history in Ethereum, we've been working for a very long time with Maker. I think we're the first real-world asset live there and have about 30 million in DAI outstanding that's actually minted, backing, sort of DAI backed by real-world assets, which is, I think, pretty cool to think of like a stable coin that actually finances these loans. We also work with different fintechs, basically, that actually originate these loans, create pools on Centrifuge, and bring these assets in. And then we have, like, at the moment, I think 209 active liquidity providers. So those are just like high net worth individuals, retail investors that are kind of like providing some of their own capital to invest in these pools. All these stats are on Ethereum today. Actually, we are proposing the runtime upgrade on Altair, which is our Kusama parachain testnet, to actually implement a lot of the tech that I just talked about on Kusama in our parachain, with a plan to roll that out in the next 2 to 3 months on Centrifuge, which will then actually, as we're all here to talk about Polkadot, mean that we're going to move more and more of this TVL into our parachain, and start kind of like working with the Akalas, with the Moonbeam, right? Anyone here, right? That is like kind of like looking for real-world assets as like a kind of a diverse, scalable asset class that they can add to their DeFi protocols. So maybe I'm going to skip this. So talking a bit about Polkadot, right? Like why do we want to work actually in this? What does it mean if we bring these real-world assets to Polkadot? We can do a lot of cool stuff with XCM that's going to be very hard if you think of like DeFi today, and I'm very excited about. Like in the end, right? Like we need scalability because we all know like financial system today has a throughput that's like hundreds of thousands of times bigger than even the fastest blockchain today. So the scalability that you get by just like running your own chain and sort of having the freedom to do whatever you want in there is extremely useful. But we also know that like DeFi actually only really was successful because people were able to do whatever they wanted and like build their own smart contracts that interacted with each other, right? And you had DeFi summer and people doing crazy farms. You had Yearn build a kind of like a, I don't even know what I would explain it, compare it to, like maybe an on-chain investment bank or like capital manager. You had people build leverage protocols that would take Uniswap LP positions and lever them to like optimize yield, right? All these kind of things, they were possible because of DeFi being open and programmable, which if you were to try to build this financial product in the real world, the first thing you'd do, you'd spend 6 months with the compliance department at a bank trying to convince them that what you're doing is legal. Then you're trying to convince them that what you're doing is safe. And then that's going to make them a lot of money, right? And then you've spent probably like a year talking to them without even building anything. Well, in DeFi, like you don't have to do that because the smart contract lets you do something. We know it's safe. We know how it works. Like you can work together. So how does it work in Polkadot? Obviously with XCM, right? So instead of having to all be on this one crowded network that is Ethereum today and having to like move liquidity around from an L1 to an L2 and back, we can actually have our chains talk to each other. Centrifuge is focusing on the tokenization, bringing these real-world assets in, working with borrowers, and then take those assets and bridge them into a money market or bridge them into an exchange, right? So I think also for us, it's especially important, if you remember kind of like these flash crashes that crypto has today and has had in the last years, well, a lot of it is coming from the fact that the only asset class we have today is very, very strongly correlated, right? So we can't build a stable financial system if when Bitcoin moves 50%, everything also moves 50%. There's no way to hedge that risk, right? If everything is correlated, you're just going to do whatever the market does. Now, it's not entirely like that, and it's getting a little bit uncorrelated already, but like we can't build a financial system just with tech stock, right? So we need to build actually a financial system that has everything from farmland to treasuries to the most speculative early stage tech equity companies or crypto projects. And so what we're bringing is stable debt, right? And that can be hugely valuable for other projects that require kind of like uncorrelated assets, uncorrelated yield to kind of like stabilize their marketplace. And like last thing, right? Like if we think of parachains, and this is something Brainchar mentioned in his talk about composable, like you can do stuff like split orders across different dexes, and you can do that without having to think of 100 different security trade-offs between 5 permutations of bridges, different deposits, withdrawal periods, and so on, right? So you get kind of like that scalability and still really, really attractive usability. For us, actually, what we're doing on the like cross-chain side is obviously XCM is like one big component, but I actually believe we need to build a layer on top of it, which is kind of like the user interface. If you think of a bridge can pass messages around, but people actually just want to interact with an app. And so what connectors is, it's kind of like an abstraction layer for us that allows really like interacting with any other parachain, interacting with other EVM chains to allow users to like create a deposit, provide liquidity into one of our pool no matter where they are. I think that's extremely helpful when you go out and like you're on Moonbeam today, you have $100,000 that you want to invest in real estate. Like you don't want to be going to Centrifuge, bridge your tokens, buy a new token, configure your new wallet, move it over, right? Like, but you do want to look at the Centrifuge user interface and just say, oh, like I like this pool, I want to invest in it from Moonbeam. What Connectors actually does, and we've announced this a few weeks ago, and are kind of like now developing that together with a lot of different projects. It allows us to kind of like provide this native user interface no matter what chain you're on. And I think that's something I'm very excited about. If you want to go check it out, I'd encourage you to go have a look. Check out our blog. I would say this is a good starting point. If you go there, read about connectors, reach out to me. I'd love to hear kind of like the cool stuff that you think of building, of how you want to use real-world assets in your project. So kind of like my last slide, a bit of a call out to motivate everybody and talk a bit about the market we're in today and the kind of like the story that DeFi has been on, right? Like kind of feels like we're all trying to figure out where we are. Well, like really just think back at the why we started to do it in the beginning. And for us, the why we're doing what we're doing is we want to create a world where everyone has access to finance. And I think that's a better world for everybody. And it's a world where like blockchain will actually proliferate, build better products, and we can actually create a much fairer financial system. And I hope that a lot of you guys will join us in this, building kind of like these sustainable products that have really a positive impact on everybody. So yeah, thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Thank you very much. Are you okay to take 1 or 2 questions?
Yeah, any questions? At the bottom.
I don't see, but... okay, sorry.
Thanks, Lucas. You've mentioned some of the respective benefits and shortcomings of scaling using cross-chain communication versus a layer 2, layer 1 that's happening on other networks, especially on Ethereum. Do you see these as two competing philosophies moving forward, two complementary philosophies? And what's your favorite approach in this regard?
I think in the end, everything will look like a crab. Is something, I don't know who it was. I think it was a guy at Nomad that said that. Yeah, Pranay. We were talking about like what bridges look like and what chains look like. And well, the crab was evolved into something like a crab, I think around 6 times, from 6 different places in the world, like 6 different species. And in the end, it's like the crab is just like a very resistant creature. And I think in the same way, like blockchains, we're at a point today where excuse me, a lot of the stuff we're still trying to figure out, but I already see like a lot of parallels between ETH2 and Polkadot, between Cosmos building shared security now, which was something they like firmly didn't believe in a few years ago. And so ultimately, like, I believe like if you think of like a scalable blockchain, we'll have to have sharding. With sharding will come some sort of like cross-shard communication. And you will want to have strong shared consensus, and you'll want to rely on like bridges that have like fully light client verifying like proofs, right? So like essentially trustless bridges. I think we're all kind of like trying to do different variations of that, and we're figuring that out. I believe XCM is a pretty good start. I believe like Polkadot had a lot of these sort of early technical bets right, and we're going to see a lot of that coming. Yeah, any other questions?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting. From a practical standpoint, how can I tokenize my real-world assets using the centrifuge platform? Like if I have a house or a car, how can I tokenize it? And from a legal standpoint, if somebody defaults on the loan, how is he going to be liquidated?
So I believe in a world where in the future we will have people coming with their houses and loans between $1,000 and $1 million with like this kind of borrower profile. They'll say, okay, we'll create this pool. As we expect to have maybe 100 loans in there by the end of the year. We're going to start offering that, and so that's a process they go through, and then like other kind of investors on the platform can look at those and say, yeah, actually I like this one or I like that one, and that's kind of how it works today. The second question on the legal, we spent almost as much time working on our legal tech as we work on our smart contracts. Not quite, but there is quite a bit of kind of like legal like structuring that we do where we basically create like a legal entity for each pool, where if you actually buy those tokens, you get legal rights against the assets in this entity. So that's the simplest description I can give. All of this is actually open source. You can look at it in our documentation, where you can like see the kind of like investment agreements, the agreements the borrowers sign that make sure that like in the 99.9 whatever 99% of cases where like the loan gets repaid as expected, it's the chain that does this, that calculates the interest payments and all that. And if this transaction was not to occur, then there's a set of legal contracts that enforce that as a borrower, like you as a lender to this pool, can force the borrower to actually repay those smart contracts, and you can take them to bankruptcy court and make sure that that gets paid back. And so this is kind of like the work we're doing. So in the end, it's very similar to like when you don't pay your bank, right? Like a collection agency will come and will make sure that you pay.
Thank you very much. If you have more questions, I would suggest to connect in the Pillar room. And thank you to have joined us.
Yeah, thank you.
For our next speaker, welcome Alain Paris from Stahl.
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here with you. We are going to talk this morning about stablecoin, and more specifically, a stablecoin which is designed for the Polkadot community. I have two things to apologize for before starting. The first one is that you are going to see a very wordy presentation. That was not the case of the previous one, so it's a change. And the second excuse is that I'm the only thing which prevents you from going to the lunch, so please wait a little more, a few more minutes, and you will be able to have lunch with us later. My name is Alain Paris. I am the co-founder of TAL and the co-founder of Stahl. What are we talking about? We are talking about stablecoin. If I was asking every one of you what you are expecting from a stablecoin, we probably would arrive to that kind of a requirement. A stablecoin is first a token where you can store value, and that this value is stable over time. It will protect your patrimony, and it will be easy to transfer from one to another. A stablecoin, you want a token which is regulated, but regulated for holder protection, respecting privacy and rights. You probably want a stablecoin which can be redeemed to fiat, that means to any kind of currency, at any moment. There's no interest in having something that you cannot exchange, even if it's protecting your value. And you will probably go for a stablecoin whose issuer can prove its solvency at any time. That's answering these requirements that we designed the Stahl. Stahl is first in its definition, according to the future MiCA regulation, it's an asset reference token. That means that this stablecoin is pegged on a basket of assets. These assets, in the case of Stahl, are 5 currencies and a share of gold, of physical gold. The Stahl is an enriched token. It's issued on a Polkadot blockchain, which has been described yesterday very well by Eli on the Logion. And you will be able to redeem the Stahl, the stablecoin, at any time for a TAL, which is a share of a basket. Two different names, 2 different objects, but the same interest for the holder. The TAL is a stable fiat, it's in the real world, and the Stahl is a stable coin, it's for the blockchain world. STAL is a quantity-restricted IRT. There's a maximum quantity of stablecoin which can be issued every day. So we will go through an order book to sort the issuance of the STAL. And as I have already said, STAL is born from a close partnership between Infratal, which is the designer of the TAL, and Logion, the Logion networks that you've been presented yesterday by Eli. First, value. You want to protect value, you want to transfer value, you want to hold value as long as possible and not losing it. The underlying asset to the STAL is the basket which is named the TAL. I've already told you that it's a basket made of currencies and physical gold. More precisely, 1,000 TALs are made of 250 euros, 100 Swiss francs, 80 Singapore dollars, 1,600 rands, 18,000 yens, 50 quids, 50 British pounds, and a fifth of a gold ounce, physical gold ounce. It's fixed. This basket is not a relative weight asset basket. It will always be the definition of the TAL. Whether the gold is going up or whether the euro is disappearing, there will still be the same amount of each of these components in the basket. As this basket is composed with currencies and with gold, which is quoted every day at every moment, the TAL has a value at any moment. So the STAL, which is pegged to the TAL one-on-one, has exactly the same value. You will notice that we didn't include US dollars. It's done on purpose. We want to protect the STAL users and the TAL holders from the extraterritoriality of the American law. You all know that as soon as you use dollar in a transaction, you can be part of some suing in the States you don't know about. The basket is metastable. You can understand that by combining different currencies, it will be more stable than any currencies individually. But it has another interest. It's that the share of gold make it an asset which is appreciating over the time. It's due to the refugee value of gold over medium and long term. As we will see on the next slide, you will not lose money thanks to it. And last thing, I said it's a quantity-restricted IRT. As there is a limited amount of gold which is purchasable on the markets, the STAL, as the TAL, cannot be as inflationary as its currency components. We will not be able to multiply by 10 because there is 10 times more euros or 10 times more English pound, the number of TAL or STALs that we issue because we are restricted by gold. Let's verify what I was saying about metastability. This is how the STAL or the TAL would have behaved over the last 3 years. It's an example of 5 or 6 different currencies. How do you read that? Take the yellow line, which is the British pound. If 3 years ago you had bought TAL with British pounds and that today you wanted to redeem your TAL for new British pounds, you would get, in absolute number, 7% more British pounds because you have stored your value in TAL. You can see that in some cases, it's very good. For example, for the yen, for the last months, the yen is losing a lot of value, so it's now a 25% appreciation of the TAL over the yen on 3 years. But in some cases, like the dollar, which is climbing very up, and with the renminbi, the Chinese yuan, which is pegged to the dollar in a certain way, we are back to zero. But over the 3 years, you have not lose money. Over 5 years, I didn't show it here, but over 5 years, you would have made money. That means that the TAL would have been appreciated against any fiat currency, sometimes very high, if you are compared to the Turkish lira or the Argentino peso, sometimes reasonably, like even against the Swiss franc, where you would make a few percentage on top. So this is just to prove that as the past will not explain the future, in the past, what I've told you about metastability is true. Let's hope that it's true for the future. What about the functional features? For the technical features, it will be very, very short because Eli explained everything yesterday with Logion. But in terms of philosophy, we don't want you to trust us. We are not another bank saying we are more trustable than the other banks that you know. We want you to verify everything we do, everything we say. Thanks to Logion, every evidence of transfers of flow will be recorded, hashed, stored, and will be verifiable. During the ramp-on, for example, if you want to buy STALs, you will make me a wire transfer of 1 million British pounds. There will be a proof of this transfer. There will be the proof that this million British pounds has been turned into the TAL basket with the exact amount. And there will be a proof that in front of this amount of TAL, there will be as many STAL minted by Logion. That is for the verification and the certification of the flows. In terms of solvability, we want to be solvable. Of course, we will be solvable, but you will have the right to check it regularly and frequently, at least once a quarter. And how are we going to do that? There will be just a vote among the STAL stakeholders, client, customers, and so on a list of top-tier auditing companies, and you will choose which company is going to audit for this quarter, and will guarantee that you will find as many assets in the basket as there are STALs issued. Just one thing about the technical features of Logion. Just to remember you that the nodes in Logion are legal officers. They are decentralized, they are independent, they are not paid by us to do what they do. So their certification is really of a lawful grade. In which environment are we going to operate? Well, first, Stalco, which is the name of the issuer, is a Swiss-based company. So we have to be regulated by the FINMA, and it will be under the DLT trading facility of the Financial Market Infrastructure Act. You already know about Logion, and the legal officers, the nodes of Logion networks are mostly into the EU zone for the moment, but we hope it's going to grow further in terms of other countries covered. It may look like we are piling proofs, regulation, and all the things that we do not like. and especially in that kind of assembly. But there's a reason. Stable coins are going to be the worst thing regulated in the coming months or years. All the central banks are against the concept of stable coins. They are okay when it's an algorithmic stable coins which is crashing, that's okay for them. But if we are designing something which is more valuable, more stable than their own currency, we will have problems. So we are piling these things since the beginning of the STAL because we want it to be legal and to comply to all regulation, even the EU regulation, even the American regulation in the coming years. There's no interest in launching a stable coin at the beginning of next year and having to shut it because the regulation is going to change. So we are anticipated, and we hope anticipated enough. What's the business model? Well, this stablecoin has been designed for the Polkadot community. You will do what you want to do with it. It will be available on the Logion parachain, and anyone can, whether an individual or a business, can purchase and resell stablecoins, the STAL. How is it priced? We think we provide a superior protection for your value, for your patrimony. So we price the service of protecting your patrimony and your value. And the price will be a percentage fee on top of the amount of money, the amount of asset that you want to protect. As the STAL has a value at any moment, there's no logic to sell the STAL at a different value than the one that you can read on a Bloomberg prompter. So it's the real price of the STAL is how much you are willing to pay for this protection. That's the percentage fee on the top of it. As I said previously, there is a limited amount of STAL which will be issued every day. So we will have an order book where everyone is going to put its orders. How many STAL do I want? How much am I ready to pay for them? And then we will settle the order book at the end of the day. Of course, by the highest bidder being served first. Nothing new under the sun. Timing, even if we know that roadmaps are not to be to be respected, we all hope that it will be released not before January 2023. There are two critical steps. One is purely regulatory with FINMA. We have to be sure that they understand what we are doing and that they let us do it. And there is another key step, which is Logion Networks being a full Polkadot parachain. Let's conclude, and there will be a few questions if you are interested. I have mentioned a few names which are all looking the same. The STAL for the stablecoin, the TAL for the basket. In fact, the STAL is the crypto declination of the TAL ecosystem. The TAL ecosystem is the stable fiat. That means that it's not a token, it's not on a blockchain, it's in the real world, and it behaves like any currency being handled by any kind of bank. The STAL is the crypto declination. It's the token. It's what is minted and burnt by the Polkadot blockchain. Why did we go in this TAL ecosystem direction? We think that everyone should take back the control of its cash. And when I say everyone, I'm not only speaking of individuals, but also for businesses. Right now, your cash belongs to your bank or your banks. Your bank, it's very bad. Your banks, it's not much better. So we want to provide you a solution to take out of the bank your cash, transfer it, change it into a metastable basket, being sure that your patrimony in relative term over the planet is stable, and not because your patrimony is in euro in the last 6 months you have lost 10% of your ability to act or to purchase outside of the Eurozone. So we want everyone to take back control of its cash, and we want to protect this cash, protect this patrimony, and we want to give back the full freedom of acting to the people who will go with us. What we aim at is, in fact, the best of two worlds. The best of the traditional financing world. I know I'm not going to be very popular when I say that there are good things in the traditional banking systems, but sometimes there are. But we don't want to take all the abuses which are piled up by the banks right now, and we want the best of the blockchain world, but without its extreme volatility. Volatility, value, what you are creating on the blockchain, it's up to you. Sometimes you have to brief, you have to settle the value you have created, and we are here to provide you the way to protect this value that you have created. We defend digital democracy. I have talked about the transparency during the order book, the transparency for the votes of the auditing body. I didn't tell you that Vital is run by a Swiss cooperative, one man, one vote, one woman, one vote too. And this digital democracy, it's difficult to find it between the digital anarchy and the digital dictatorship, which are the two ways that things can derail. We are very fond of respecting ethics because we really think that in ethics size matters. And we are very proud that the STAL is released for the Polkadot community because we are pretty sure that creative as you are, you will make the best of it. Thank you for listening, and I'm willing to answer any question.
Okay, merci. Thank you very much, Alain. I know it's lunching time, so I don't know if someone have one or two questions for you. Yes, we have one, at least one. Maybe we could catch another one, and after that, it will be time to take the lunch time.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate the effort you've been through to be compliant with the stablecoin initiative. I wonder when it comes to adoption in the crypto space, especially, you have a number of actors like exchanges and other entities that probably don't achieve the same level of compliance. Does this pose a problem for an initiative like yours that is fully compliant to interact with these entities and have your stablecoin used by them?
Well, you've put your finger where it hurts. It's true. Compliance to regulations and regulations which are evolving everywhere differently from another place, that's difficult. We chose to operate from Switzerland because we think Switzerland's are more reasonable people when we are talking about regulating. Historically speaking, regulation was made to protect customers from the banks everywhere on the planet. That's why there are regulations. Okay, for the last 10 years, regulations are made to protect banks from new entrants. So we have to navigate there. We have to be compliant with the regulatory body, but we have to keep what we think about getting things private, all the privacy and the personal rights. When it comes to the stablecoin, there may be restriction geographical area by geographical area, and we don't know. We will start selling STAL, and we will accept being paid by dollars to buy STAL, even if we don't put dollars into our basket. But do we know if we will be able to do it for 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years before we are stopped? We don't know. That's the same stuff with all geographical zones. Probably at one moment there will be the need of establishing a real company in that area, in that zone, which is compliant with the local authority, just because we are selling directly to its citizen. Even if we didn't sell to the citizen, but just the citizen discovered that the STAL exists and wants to buy some, that's passive solicitation. But we all know that you cannot argue with a regulatory body if he wants to stop you.
Okay, I don't know if we have another question or not. Yes, just one. Okay, it will be the last one, just before lunchtime. Please.
Thanks for your words. It was very interesting. And now I just ask myself, do you have any objective to also put your stablecoin in this norm, you know, ISO 222? Because you are talking about MiCA, you also said that per day they have some amount of transaction that you cannot overdid. But what about MiCA 222? Not MiCA, I mean ISO.
Well, I'm not that familiar with ISO. The way we solve this kind of questions is by the design of the stablecoin and of the STAL. We took the hard way. We decided that it will be pegged one-on-one, that the money which is stored is not going to be invested, that we will not make money out of your money. So we have a way of behaving which is much, much more ethical than any bank or any financial institution which is regulated in the world. Will it be enough for every regulation? Probably. Will it take time to prove to the regulatory body that the way we have designed the STAL is very, very compliant with what they are asking for? Yes, it will take time, and maybe in some cases they will prevent us from selling during months. We have to adapt, but we are not doing that for 2 years or 3 years. That's really the tip of the iceberg. We really think that through the TAL and the STAL, we are creating a new central bank, a private central bank, with full reserves. So it's going to take time, it's going to be hard, but we think we will do everything to succeed, and we count on you to help us.
Thank you very much, Alain. I ask to Elisabeth to join the scene, because it's lunchtime now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will reconvene after lunch at around 2:30. So please come and go and eat, and we'll welcome you back. I'm looking forward to have our next speakers.